So this is a press preview as we have a look at the newspapers as they have a press preview.
Very, very nice to see you.
Preview.
Press preview.
I just thought I'd add a little bit of extra spice to it. You know, you like a bit of glamour, especially you two here. We are looking through the papers for the Evening Standard columnist Ayesha Hazarika and the Sun's political editor Tom Newton-Dunn. I don't know what's got into me tonight, but I feel a little bit special and sparkly. Let's have a look at some of the front pages before we chat to these two. The Financial Times leads with 21st Century Fox's bid for full control of Sky and the findings of the Competition and Markets Authority. The Eye leads with fake news, reporting Britain will launch a new national security team to tackle disinformation online. For the Telegraph, the Union flag will only be flown once a year at Scottish Government buildings because of a decision by the SNP. A new pill which could help people suffering with arthritis makes the front of the Express. The Daily Mail claims taking herbal remedies and prescription drugs at the same time could risk people's health. The Metro follows up the new investigation against black cab rapist John Warboys. The Mirror also leads with that. For the Star, it's got a story on Coronation Street. And the Sun reports that the decision to take steak off the menu at Wetherspoons left diners in shock. The headline of the night, Apocalypse Cow. I've got to say, your headline writers there. I mean, that is top work, Tom.
They are. None of them are written by me, as you
No, I can well imagine.
People are far cleverer than me.
I can well imagine. Let's kick off with the Matt cartoon in the Telegraph, should we?
Yes, Matt has, in his inimitable way, on the front page of the Telegraph, summed up several stories here at once. The NHS funding crisis and, of course, Boris's incredible mauling in Cabinet today for daring to suggest that the NHS should get some of the Brexit dividend. And there it is, nicely summed up. Only one slight problem, perhaps, with the Matt cartoon here is Matt lives and draws in a wonderful England that was, quite frankly, way gone by of 20, 30, 50 years ago, in that A&E is largely full of people covered in bandages and also people who have suffered from the worst sort of ailments, like getting a vase stuck on their heads. In fact, A&E is throbbing with all sorts of appalling cases in this modern day of age. But there it is, it sums it up, and it's another brilliant hit.
Yeah. £100 million a week for the NHS. Why is anyone complaining, Ayesha?
Well, the problem... There's so many layers to this. Part of this is Boris and his need for constant attention. He's basically got some sort of attention deficit disorder, and he has to try and be in the press as much as possible. We kind of pitch-rolled this actually last week when we were talking about Boris, because he doubled down on his £350 million a week for the NHS on the Brexit bus. And he became very publicly associated with that claim, which, of course, has been very controversial.
I think we said it was going to lead to trouble, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we did. How
and low.
Honestly, it's amazing, like Mystic Meg. and of course, you know, I think he's kind of felt, look, A, I need to stay in the headlines, B, I need to try and double down on this message because actually it's kind of damaging for my brand to be associated with this, so I've got to stick with it. But he got a very big dressing down in Cabinet today, and ironically, it was leaked from Cabinet that nobody should leak things from Cabinet, which always happens. I remember when I was a special advisor in government, this would always happen. Everyone would get a stern warning about not leaking things, and then everybody would sort of immediately start sort of texting various journalists. But the problem is there's the sort of gossipy nature of Boris being up and down and Boris being on manoeuvres. But there is a bigger question about the funding crisis that the NHS is facing as well. And none of this looks good for the government. It doesn't look good for Theresa May to be sort of slapping down Boris Johnson and saying, ha, there is no new money, when actually the doctors and nurses and patients who need the NHS are crying out for more money.
This is the issue, isn't it? I mean, it does bring up this sort of contradiction.
It does. Most TV viewers and probably newspaper readers tomorrow morning will look at this and say, Boris is calling for more money for the NHS, which is money we're eventually going to get back from the EU in 2021, and the Cabinet don't want to do this. So unless you're really tuned into the minutiae of this, it would be hard not to fall off the fence onto Boris's point of view here.
Which is presumably why he's done it. I mean, is he that conspiratorial?
So why Boris does anything, quite frankly, is a tremendous riddle, and far be it from me as a political editor of a mere decade standing to dare to suggest such motives. My feeling is He does it because he's quite an instinctual, emotional politician, and he feels he needs to put himself in the right place on debates. And he has identified, a very popular issue, which, by the way, will also, if it comes true, bail him out of his great referendum promise, which I know is, for him, incredibly personal. He has to see this £350 million a week, or £100 million has been dumbed down a little, delivered for his own personal reputation. But what I don't think he does, he doesn't really go into these things with great strategies and plans. And this is a great criticism by a lot of his quite close allies, and they were making the same thing today, is that he had no plan for cabinet. Unfortunately, he signposted his great stunt many days off, as we were talking about it, 7 days ago when it was in a paper last week. So they were all ready for him. And Theresa May had orchestrated this brilliant little ambush where one after the other cabinet minister got up to attack him, and poor old Boris had to go roundabout last just before Michael Gove, who he could probably bet on was going to back him up, and got filleted. And he was stuck down this political cul-de-sac and couldn't get out. But the wider argument, I think, for all this, or the wider truth is, it is simply astonishing, and I think we should forget this, panning out a tiny bit from how much the NHS should or shouldn't be getting. It is absolutely astonishing, I underline astonishing, for a Prime Minister to not just orchestrate a filleting job on her Foreign Secretary inside a cabinet meeting, but then actively send out her spokesman to tell the world's media. That is unheard of and signs huge amounts of the extraordinary political times we're living in.
I mean, it also just shows how completely divided the Conservative Party is at the moment. And the reason, I mean, you said Boris likes to be on the right side of the argument. I think you have to define
popular
what
side,
right exactly.
I think exactly.
I think it's what is the right side of the argument for him and what's going to be popular. Remember, this is a guy who, before the EU referendum, was sort of hedging his bets on both sides. Yeah. And Boris is firmly fixed on being on manoeuvres for wanting to replace Theresa May when Brexit is done. OK,
let's move on to the front of the eye and the fake news unit, as it's been dubbed.
This is an interesting idea, because it is really not much more than an idea at the moment, announced by the government this afternoon that there will be a fake news unit as one of the first decisions taken during the Security Capability Review, which is being led by the National Security Advisor, Mark Sedwill, which, quite frankly, has scored its very first victory this evening, right here and now, and it's all over the front page of the Eye. Because this story about this unit, which hasn't been set up yet, the government is unable to tell us journalists when we asked them this afternoon where it will be, exactly how it will do its business, on Twitter or on email, whatever. This unit is already pushing, via its own brand of fake news about itself, the main story of the day off the front pages, which is the announcement, simultaneous to this, that the government is having to do a second defence review in as many years, because basically the MOD has run out of money. Yeah. The government threw out this story to confuse us, so we don't, or interest us with a nice shiny new thing maybe, so that we don't talk about the far bigger story, which is the MOD's coffers are empty.
Yeah. But also, I think the fact that there's so little detail about how this is actually going to work to sort of spread misinformation. Remember, where a lot of this information gets spread is, with the big technology companies, and they're not subject to regulation of any kind. They're not going to suddenly, just sort of subject themselves to sort of ad hoc regulation when they don't need to. So again, it's a sort of fake news story about a fake news unit. It's posturing, but there's very little that actually can be done.
That said, I mean, if we stop being cynical for 4.5 seconds, there is also a need for big, cumbersome, lumbering Western governments to start taking on the sort of attacks, largely full up with fake news. Outfits like the Russian propaganda machine, North Korean propaganda machine, and terrorists who do spread huge amounts of news unchallenged on social media.
The problem is we view it as something new. It's not new. I mean, misinformation.
Exactly.
For a long time.
And also, I think
the difference is social media, you can't correct it.
Yeah, but one of the problems
there's only one voice.
As you say, it's quite nuanced. It's not. You get the odd thing which is like completely egregiously wrong, but quite often it's manipulated information which goes viral already in like hyper echo chambers on Twitter and Facebook. So a message is kind of construed in one way. You're preaching to the converted, and it kind of snowballs from there. So it's actually quite difficult to pinpoint the sort of precise accuracy of a lot of this stuff.
OK, let's move on just for a couple of minutes to the Telegraph. As a Scot, Ayesha, would you want to see the Union flag flying in Scotland a bit more often than it looks like it's going to be?
Well, I mean, I don't spend my whole time kind of staring at flags, but, you know, flags are important symbols for people. And, you know, I think it's important to have the Psalter. The Psalter is a very beautiful flag. I'm very proud of that flag, but I'm also very proud of the Union Jack as well, and we are still in a union. I suspect this has been done to kind of stir up a bit of division on Scottish independence because the SNP definitely like keeping that in the news.
Yeah, Tom.
It's clever yet cheeky politics by Nicola Sturgeon, and she's issued this edict that will have the Union flag now flying once a year. And the Telegraph make the point that I'm sure will infuriate Telegraph readers tomorrow, that the gay pride flag will now fly more often than the Union flag over various Scottish buildings. And you're absolutely right, Nicola Sturgeon does this simply because she can, and it will stir up nationalist sentiment, and it may, you never know what, encourage more people to want to leave the Union if all they ever see is their Psalter and think that's the only thing.
I mean, my kind of general thing in this, these sort of, I mean, this is kind of, as Tom said, cheeky politics. I think there's much bigger issues in Scotland if you look at sort of what's happening in schools, in hospitals, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's more important for the SNP to get on with the day job and not faff about with the flags.
Interesting. Your thoughts on that, if you would, at Sky Stephen on Twitter tonight, if you're so inclined. Stay with us, though. Coming up, who's been recognised, and perhaps more importantly, in this year's Oscars, who's been snubbed? We'll tell you more in a moment. Well, this is the press preview. We're looking through the papers with Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn. Let's have a look at the FT, should we? Looking at this men's club in the city.
So this is an extraordinary scoop by the FT, and I have to say hats off to the FT for investigating this. This is something called the President's Club. It's a men-only club, lots of CEOs and the great and the good, very, very rich men. It took place last Thursday night. It was raising money for charity, men only, but they did hire 130 hostesses, many young women, students, and the women were told to wear skimpy black outfits, matching underwear and high heels. And at the after party, many were groped, sexually harassed and propositioned. And this is coming in the climate of, you know, huge uproar about behaviour and practices and sexual harassment. Some of these women had horrific experiences, subject to groping, lewd comments, requests to join diners in their bedroom. Now, what's interesting is who was on the guest list. Now, we don't know if everybody actually went, but on the guest list was people like Philip Green, Dragon Den star Peter Jones, the Ocado boss, Nadeem Zahawi, who is the recently appointed Under-Secretary of State for Children and Families, and Jonathan Mendelsohn, a Labour peer and party fundraiser. And David Walliams was the host for the evening, which I'm pretty surprised about as well. So I think it just shows for all these people that say, stop fussing about sexism, you feminists, there's no problem, I beg to differ.
We should probably point out that the President's Club is a perfectly decent organisation that tries to raise huge amounts of money for charity, and none of the groping and clear sexual impropriety is organised and part of the official script.
No.
That said, what I think this does explain quite succinctly is that despite everything we've seen and done and gone through, because this expose happened very recently in the last few days, I think, and all the Harvey Weinstein allegations and those of many, many others, this still says if you've got money and power and privilege, you still think you can get away with whatever it is you want, and you will certainly try it on with hundreds of your colleagues and esteemed peers watching, which is quite an extraordinary fact. After everything that we've seen and done and heard over the last 6 months, there are still people who have so much to lose by behaving like this, prepared to do it, is an amazing fact.
OK, well, no doubt there'll be more on that in the coming days, I should think. Sticking with the FT, looking at the Fox-Sky deal.
Yeah, this is obviously a big story, and the Competition and Markets Authority has put another block in the Murdoch's bid to own the whole of Sky. And I think what they are saying is that it just comes down to media plurality and, you know, how much control one organisation or one group should have. The CMA calculated that the news outlets controlled by the Murdochs would be watched, read and heard by nearly a third of the UK's population, and that, you know, so they're going to be taking more soundings, and a decision will be reached in May. But I think this just goes to the bigger issue of, you know, we were talking about the fake news earlier, and I think what is incredibly important in our democracy now is to have a plurality of different views, and I think media ownership is important for that, for newspapers, for broadcasters, and also, we mentioned this before, you know, the big tech giants are huge providers of information and news consumption. So I think all of this has to be looked at in the round.
OK, let's change tack slightly and look at the Metro, should we? Because they've got a... Oh, there you go. That's their banner at the top, which we've zoomed up massively for you. It's great, though, isn't it? It's quite exciting looking at the Oscars.
Yeah, it is. Get In, which, of course, is a joke on Get Out, which is the
Yes.
film... I knew that, of course. Which is the film that,
You're down with them.
I just looked it up. A film starring Daniel Kaluuya, who is one brilliantly of 3 different Brits nominated out of a total of 6 for Best Actor this year. So we've got 50-50 chance already of taking the #1 Best Award, along with Best Actress.
And also, it's just really important to say, you know, as a relatively small country, we punch so well above our weight when it comes to the creative industries. We're absolutely brilliant at sort of film, music, fashion. You know, we absolutely do so well at these award ceremonies. And, I mean, I went to see The Darkest Hour.
It's an amazing film.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, Gary Oldman is amazing, but also Kirsten Scott Thomas is absolutely wonderful as his wife as well. And another film of note, 3 Billboards outside of Ebbing, it was really absolutely amazing. I'm sure Frances McDermott is, you know, set to do pretty well.
I was a little bit surprised there wasn't more for The Post in terms of nominations. Because I mean, only because I saw that on Saturday, as some of you know from when I was on Sunrise, blabbing about it. I just thought it was just the most...
Blabbing or blubbing or both?
Blabbing, not blubbing, no, blabbing. But I mean, it's so beautifully done, and, you know, a historic moment in time, but also quite fitting for the modern age as well, I should think.
The one other thing that's quite surprising is that there are a lot of nominations, obviously, but you'd expect this year for them to be swamped purposely by women, for Hollywood to make a point that, you know, we can beat the Weinsteins and we can celebrate incredible array of female talent. But, you know, there aren't that many female directors up. So maybe they haven't missed a trick, maybe they're just doing on meritocracy, which is the right thing to do. But, again, it was a surprise.
Yeah, indeed. Look, we'll see you two a little bit later on. Thank you for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Check on the weather. So this is the press preview on Sky News, and we'll have a look at the newspapers as they arrive. We'll talk through those in the next 30 minutes with Ayesha Hazarika from the Evening Standard and The Sun's political editor, Tom Newton-Dunn. Evening to you both once again.
Hello.
Before we have a chat, let's just run you through those front pages, should we? We'll start with the Financial Times. Leads with 21st Century Fox's bid for full control of Sky and the findings of the Competition and Markets Authority. The Eye saying Britain will launch a new national security team to tackle disinformation or fake news online. For the Telegraph, why the Union flag will only be flown once a year at Scottish Government buildings. The Times reports the results of a new study which warns obesity and lazy lifestyle will lead to people suffering multiple serious illnesses in old age. A new pill which could help people suffering from arthritis makes the front of the Express. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail claims taking herbal remedies and prescription drugs at the same time could risk our health. The Metro follows up the new investigation against black cab rapist John Warboys. Same for the Mirror, who say the inquiry was launched after a new victim came forward. The gentle charm of Coronation Street is being lost to its hard-hitting storylines, according to The Star. And The Sun has our headline of the night, Apocalypse Cow, about the diners left stunned when Wetherspoons took steak off the menu. Shocked myself by that, and I'm vegetarian. Let's talk through some of those then with Ayesha and with Tom. We'll kick off with The Sun, page 2. Might Boris quit?
Well, I have picked a story by my illustrious paper reviewer. This is a really interesting story. Boris has been making headlines, as Boris always does make the headlines, and he got a severe dressing down in Cabinet today because he's been sort of out there for about a week now saying that the NHS needs more money. He basically has doubled down on that big promise on that Brexit bus of the NHS getting lots of money, and he feels that he's now got to kind of honour his promise. But I think he's also doing it to kind of cause trouble for Theresa May. He wants to be the person out there making the arguments for the NHS. But he got a big slapping down today in Cabinet. He got sort of told off for leaking things, and then his sort of slapping down got leaked to the press. But what you have discovered is that actually there are rumours swirling around that he might want to double down so much on his plea for money for the NHS that he might even think about quitting. And that would cause serious problems for Theresa May, because it would make him look like a bit of a martyr to the public. It would make him look like he's the one battling for money for the NHS, and she and the others are saying no.
So,
Brilliantly said.
it is. There's nothing to add to that, have you, Tom? No. I mean, this would be a huge problem for Downing Street, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be, largely because Boris is still incredibly popular out there, certainly amongst the Tory membership, if not necessarily throughout the whole country any longer, because he's rather a Marmite character. So this is a theory. This is what some ministers I've been speaking to and others have been speaking to today now think is what's happening. It may well not be true, and it must be said that allies and sources close to Boris furiously deny any suggestion he's preparing to resign and walk out the cabinet. But the theory goes like this. Boris, I know, and we all know, I think, down in Westminster, has for some months now been quite worried about the nature of Brexit. He strongly fears, and he would say evidence is now beginning to prove this, that Theresa May is beginning to buckle a little, beginning to compromise a little too much, and isn't giving the clear break from the EU that he wants. You know, no rules, no harmonisation, just a clear dispatch. He says there's a big fight on Brexiteers' hands to achieve the Brexit that they want, or indeed any Brexit potentially. So that might explain potentially why he's owning huge amounts of newsprint at the moment, making big stands on delivering on things that she never offered, but he certainly did offer in the referendum, such as £350 million a week. And you can see a small platform building here of issues that when perhaps one day the levy breaks and he decides up with I can no longer put, he can then claim you did this, this and this, I said you do that, that and that is why I'm walking. And now the Tory party should elect me as leader, not you.
So that would be the point, would it, to spark a leadership election if he went?
I don't think many think Boris can win the Tory leadership any longer from inside of the cabinet. To do that, he would have to sign up to Theresa May's deal. His shot, and it may still be a slim shot, but it's a shot, is to represent hard Brexit, clean Brexit, whatever you want to call it, as the opposing voice to whatever it is Theresa May has delivered.
If Theresa May had to go, though, isn't the big obstacle to anything like this that it would actually it opens the door for Jeremy Corbyn to get his number?
I don't think Boris thinks that strategically. You know, I think he's a very kind of emotionally charged person. I think he sort of does what feels right for him in the moment. But look,
I agree with that, which is the flaw to this whole conspiracy theory.
But you know, look, it's very seductive for us to, you know, it's Westminster gossip, it's who's up, who's down. But the bigger issue for the public is going to be that the NHS is in this massive crisis. It genuinely does need more money. There's lots of things that are not going well with the country at the moment. We've had the collapse of Carillion and lots of other things. And it does look like there's an internal leadership contest already starting. And remember, Theresa May was too weak to sack or move Boris Johnson.
But why then is the shadow health secretary not saying, yeah, this is fantastic, Boris is absolutely right, works out an extra £5 billion for the NHS, which is what we've been calling for. He's actually just turned around and said, oh, this is just Boris trying to get into
No, I think
10.
what Jonathan Ashworth has actually said is that the Tory party are listening to what they've said. I mean, they have been out calling for £5 billion immediately, and what the Labour Party have said that if they were in government now, they would do an emergency budget and do that massive injection of cash right now. So I think the Labour Party is still absolutely saying, look, you know, we're calling for this money. But this is lots of internal politics about the future succession of the Conservative Party.
And actually, do you know what? Times like this, Labour Party don't really need to do very much. They can just sit back and just let it roll. I mean, this sort of stuff helps the Labour Party no ends by showing division and disunity. And remember, we've got PMQs tomorrow, and you never know Jeremy Corbyn, because sometimes he surprises us by choosing some strange topics to talk about. But I think you'd have to bet a large sum of money that he's now got 6 gifted questions all about more spending. I'm with the Foreign Secretary. I agree with Boris. Don't you agree with Boris, Theresa? And it's a gift. And that it is precisely that gift to Labour
I wonder if-
that a lot of the cabinet were having a go specifically about Boris. And one said to him, "You have just gifted PMQs to Jeremy Corbyn tomorrow, and I hope you're proud of yourself."
I wonder if he'll be in the chamber.
I think he has to be, really, because if he's not, that in itself, believe me, that kind of story, that kind of philosophising about Boris Johnson will explode if he doesn't sit very close to Theresa tomorrow.
Well,
we'll have to take it. We'll have to suck it all up.
Yeah, well, we'll have live coverage in just over 12 hours of that, of course. Definitely.
One more sleep.
One more sleep, yeah.
More sleep.
It is going to be an interesting one. Telegraph, Britain's prescription drug problem.
So ministers have ordered an urgent review into prescription drug addiction. There is a rising concern that more and more people are becoming addicted to very strong painkillers, also anti-anxiety and antidepressant drugs. I mean, the addiction to painkillers is something which is very kind of real, and it sort of creeps up on people without them realising, because nobody thinks painkillers is a sort of a bad drug. It's not sort of a rock and roll sort of drug, but actually more and more people are getting a dependency on it, and it can have some severe problems. People become very, very addicted. Getting people off prescription painkillers is very, very difficult as well. So I think this is a really, really important move and needs to be looked at very seriously.
And, of course, the comparison with the US is frightening. 200,000 deaths a year.
But it's interesting, isn't it? When you
abuse.
think of it, we hear all the time from the States, you know, these actors or whatever who are hooked on prescription medication, is the phrase. And often, I mean, over here, you sort of think, what are they talking about?
Well, it's closer
now
to
we're
home,
seeing...
because if you look, the next story that we picked in The Sun is actually tonight at the National Television Awards. Ant and Dec, who are our completely sort of loved... you know, they seem to scoop everything up. Ant McPartlin has had a very, very tough time, and he got addicted to painkillers. He had a knee injury and got addicted to painkillers and had to go into rehab and had a very, very tough time. And actually, they dedicated his award to kind of all the struggles that he'd gone through. So it is actually happening right here as well. It's not just an American phenomenon.
We had Tom Petty last week. You know, the legendary singer died because of
fentanyl, wasn't it?
Yeah, a painkiller overdose. Prince before him. And half the problem here is the sheer nature of the drugs we're doing. Things like fentanyl, incredibly strong drugs, 60 times more powerful than heroin, I think it is. And you can easily, if you up the dosage, you self-medicate, you up your own dosage, before you know it, you're hooked. So 88 million prescriptions a year now for opioids and antidepressants in Britain, which I think someone's calculated, one of the papers is 10,000 an hour. It's now seen by the NHS as even more of a health problem than illegal drugs, which is quite an extraordinary statistic. And it's crept up on us slowly under the guise of brilliant, medical developments and incredible life-saving, pain-beating drugs. Suddenly we're, staring down the barrel of a nation of addicts.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting. I know that things like tramadol, they've changed the level of drug now for tramadol, so you can't just get it as easily as you could even a couple of years ago.
And also there is a big debate about how readily GPs should give out antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs as well, and, should there be other things like talking therapies and things like that.
But of course, that's part of the issue with those is that doesn't apply to everyone. Does a lot of people have a chemical discrepancy?
There's a chemical imbalance. And also these services, it's all very well saying, look, go and do your talking therapies and things, but we all know there's a big squeeze on those services as well, so you might need to get something sooner.
To the Mail, looking at Prince William, not happy with social media.
No, he's not. He made a speech today at the Charity Commission where it has to be said, although it wasn't completely included in the Daily Mail's headline, that it was an attack on both social media and news coverage, something he calls the commercialisation of news. News has always been pretty commercial, certainly for papers like mine and stations like yours. But his argument is, especially with social media, we are becoming a silo society, living in echo chambers where coarse and unpleasant and often anonymous abuse and debate is really making us quite a nasty bunch of people. He says the commercialisation of news, the ever harder edge to try and find a line or a bit of drama or a bit of abuse is adding to this. But all in all, it is having quite a detrimental effect on society, and certainly on the social media element of it all. If you look at what's happened to the political debate and how politicians...
You just look at the abuse that we get afterwards. That's just to each other.
Which is mild. That's just in the green room. But he's not wrong. I mean, it is a very, very ugly atmosphere out there at the moment, and the medium itself isn't helping.
No.
I mean, he himself says, look, you know, he says we're at a moment of reckoning. He says he's not a Luddite, but it feels like things have reached a real low. And the Children's Commissioner, a great woman called Anne Longfield, sort of says, you know, at the stage where, you know, 10-year-olds are becoming psychologically dependent on affirmation from social media, and that is a big part of kind of mental health problems for them as well.
Interesting. And of course, the interesting thing for me is that Prince William says that people will listen, which is...
Here's hoping.
Yeah. OK, your thoughts on that, should you want to take to social media tonight, at Sky Stephen. Stay with us, though. We've got more...
Get onto social media and tell us what you think of your silo about Prince William.
It is the problem of asking for tweets, isn't it? Coming up for you, a rare mistake. Why Wetherspoon's customers won't be saying well done after a fiasco on steak night.
Sorry.
The irony. No, it's perfectly true.
It is totally true.
So we're looking into the papers with Ayesha and Tom. Let's have a look at the front of the Telegraph and the Union Jack situation in Scotland. Sturgeon hauls down the Union flag, we're told. She's saying no.
Allegedly. What the Telegraph and the Daily Mail also report on their front page in Scotland is that she has issued an edict that the Union flag will now only be flown once a year. There are 14 different royal special occasions where the Union flag is supposed to be flown, and as of new Scottish Government guidance, it will only appear once on Remembrance Day, which Telegraph readers will be in arms if they hear about the Telegraph's fourth paragraph, which says the gay pride flag will now fly more often than the Union flag. And of course,
Telegraph readers may love that.
The fact that...
It might be all for a bit of pride.
Maybe I'm stereotyping Telegraph readers, and the glimpse out there, if I am, then I apologise profusely. I think I might be right.
It's just worth saying that Nicola Sturgeon has tweeted twice saying that, look, this story is not true, and she said it's been a practice to fly the lion rampant, but she doesn't say anything about this hauling down of the Union flag. I suspect that this is part of kind of stirring things up on the independent stuff, because that always is very important for the project and the mission of the SNP. But I think people in Scotland will be more concerned about actually important things like the health service and schools and things like that.
If you're watching Nicola Sturgeon, at Sky Stephen, send me a tweet and we shall clear that up once and for all. To the FT, looking at this men's club.
Yeah, so this is called the President's Club. It's an investigation by the FT. There was a big gala dinner last Thursday. Lots of bigwigs, CEOs, lots of rich, powerful men only, no women invited. That should have been a bit of a warning in itself. David Walliams hosting it, and they hired 130 special hostesses, young women, many of them students. At the after party, there are horrific stories of groping, propositioning and full-on lewd sexual abuse. The list of people who were invited, we don't know if all of these people attended, included Philip Green, Dragon Denstar, Peter Jones, and two quite prominent politicians, Nadeem Zahawi, who's just been appointed the Minister for Children and Families, and Jonathan Mendelsohn, who's a Labour peer. So look, this story is disgraceful. It kind of shows that there is still a lot of bad, sleazy sexual harassment going on. So for anyone who says, you know, you feminists, you know, it's all stop moaning, it shows you right here and now this type of behaviour is still going on.
Yeah, it's concerning, isn't it? Can we finish off with the front of The Sun, if we can, because we've called it our headline of the night. Apocalypse Cow. I mean, it's great, isn't it? This is what we want from The Sun, I have to say. I love a bit of this.
I say it's what we want from any newspaper.
Well, yeah.
Decent pun. So the story is that Wetherspoons, who have their regular Tuesday steak club night, where 90,000 people turn up and eat steak on a Tuesday night, suddenly, about 3 o'clock this afternoon, they cancelled all steaks and served other interesting mixes of salad and granola and other type of sort of product because...
Was it granola?
It was
Quinoa. You can't even pronounce it. Quinoa.
Quinoa. What is quinoa when we're at home?
It's a grain. It's a South American
Sorry, I'm
grain.
so sorry.
We call it
gluten-free.
quinoa at home.
Quinoa and I was trying to so you didn't hear what I said, but quinoa and halloumi salad, which I'm going to explain in full. I'll say exactly what it is later. Anyway, they ran out of meat, or the meat was all mistakenly, strangely pulled from the menu, and it's a huge mystery why. But it's caused untold upset.
Let's have a look at the inside page. I think we've got that.
And indeed, it's been a terrible mistake.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Tom has been practicing that in the green room for quite a long time, just to get the delivery absolutely perfect.
So much so, I ignored quinoa, whatever it is.
Quinoa.
Quinoa.
Quinoa. It's what all the middle classes are eating now instead of rice and things, isn't
exactly, exactly. It's South American green.
Lovely.
Probably lots of Romanas eat it. I'm doing the dig at I'm trolling myself. Do you see what I'm doing
yourself.
now?
Yeah, you know that Twitter's going to go mad now.
Voting Remain is unmanly. I would dispute that.
Right, lovely, you two. Well, I hope you can go home and have a late night steak, the pair of you. Good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed.
While we're on the way home.
Stay with us here on Sky News. Kimberly's got all your headlines in just a moment.